I have been trying to find the right place to begin this story for a long time, not because the beginning is hard to find, but because once I say it out loud, once I put it into words that other people can hear, it becomes a thing that existed, a thing that was real and not just mine. And for most of my life, keeping it mine was the only way I knew how to survive it. So let me begin here. I was married for 21 years to a man who was not cruel. He did not drink. He did not raise his hand. He worked from before the sun rose until after it went down, and he provided everything the community said a husband was supposed to provide. And in all of those 21 years, he never once asked me how I felt. Not once. Not after our first child was born blue and we lost him before he drew a breath. Not after the winter the barn flooded and we nearly lost everything. Not after I fell from the hayloft and lay in bed for 3 weeks with a cracked rib and pain that made it hard to breathe. He was there for all of it. He was present for all of it. And he was absent for all of it in the way that matters most. That is what I want to talk about today. Not cruelty. Something quieter than cruelty. Something that does not have a name in the community I came from, but that I have been trying to name ever since. Before I go further, I want to say something honest. More than 90% of the people watching this right now have not yet subscribed. And I want you to know that these stories are not easy to tell. Each one costs something. Each one is a door I open that I spent years keeping closed. If you have ever stayed in a life that was not hurting you in ways you could point to, but was not feeding you in ways you needed, if you have ever tried to explain a loneliness that had no visible cause, then you already understand what I am about to describe. Please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It is free, and it means these stories can keep reaching the people who need them most. And while you are here, I want to know something from you. Tell me in the comments, what is the one memory you find yourself returning to again and again, the one you have never quite been able to set down? I read every single comment, every one. His name was Aaron. He was 26 when we married, and I was 19. He was tall and had a serious face, and he had already been farming his family's land for 4 years on his own because his father had passed early. The community respected him. My father respected him. He was the kind of man the Ordnung held up as an example of what a man should be. Steady, quiet, disciplined, unbothered by comfort or softness. These were not presented to me as warnings. They were presented to me as virtues. I believed them to be virtues. I had been raised to believe that a man who needed nothing was a man who could give everything. It took me a very long time to understand that a man who needs nothing also cannot recognize that the person beside him needs something. That is not a character flaw in the way we usually mean the words. It is something else. Something I did not have language for until I was nearly 50 years old and sitting in a counselor's office in a small town in Ohio with my hands in my lap trying to explain why I had left a marriage that had never once produced a bruise. Our wedding was in November. I wore a blue dress I had made myself. The ceremony was long and the benches were hard, and I sat through it with the particular stillness of a girl who has decided to be brave. I had met Aaron 4 times before we married. 4 times, each time in the presence of family, each time in a context where the conversation was about practical things, the farm, the house, what my skills were in the kitchen and the garden, whether I was healthy, whether my family had a history of anything that would concern a man planning to build a life. I understood that this was how it was done. I did not expect to know him deeply before we married, but I believed in the way young people believe things that have not yet been tested, that knowing would come, that the years would bring it, that you grew into a marriage the way you grew into anything else, gradually, through the accumulation of shared days. What I did not understand, and what took me years to learn, was that growing into something requires both people to be growing. And Aaron was not growing. He was not getting worse. He was not changing in ways that caused harm. He was simply finished. He had arrived at himself before I met him, and he had no particular interest in arriving anywhere else. He woke at 4:30 every morning. He worked until dark. He ate what I put on the table without comment. He came to bed when he was tired, and he left when he was rested. He spoke when there was something practical to communicate. He was never unkind. He was never warm. He existed in our shared life the way a piece of furniture exists in a room. You know it is there. You arrange yourself around it. You could not explain, if someone asked, what it would feel like to have a conversation with it. I want to tell you about the first time I understood what I was living in. It was about 8 months after we married. I had been sick for most of a week, a bad cold that had settled into my chest and made everything heavy. I had still cooked and cleaned because there was no one else to do it, and no system in that world for a wife who was not functioning. On the 5th day, I sat down at the kitchen table in the middle of the afternoon because I could not stand any longer, and I started to cry. Not loudly, just quietly, the way you cry when you are tired and your body is failing you, and you are very far from feeling like yourself. Aaron came in from outside for water and saw me sitting there. He stopped. He looked at me for a moment, and then he said, "Is supper going to be late?" That was all. "Is supper going to be late?" I told him no. He went back outside. I sat at that table for another few minutes, and then I stood up and I started the supper. And I put something away inside myself that day, something I had been hoping for, something I had not even fully named yet, and I did not take it back out for a very long time. I want to be careful here because I know what some people will say. They will say, that is just how men were raised in that world. That is the culture. That is what men in those communities knew how to be. And I am not saying they are wrong. Aaron was not an anomaly. He was, in many ways, the product that the system was designed to produce. A man who worked hard and expected little and gave nothing that could not be measured in labor or provision. The community around us reinforced this constantly. A good husband provides. A good husband does not complain. A good husband is steady. Emotion was not part of the vocabulary of goodness for men in that world. It was, if anything, a liability. I understood that. I had grown up watching my own father be exactly that kind of man. What I had not understood was that I was different from my mother in a way that would matter. My mother could live inside that silence and find her sustenance elsewhere, in her garden, in her friendships with other women, in the particular private life that women in those communities build for themselves inside the walls of the life they are given. I could not. Something in me kept reaching for something that was not there and finding the absence over and over again, and each time the absence felt a little larger. We had 5 children. I want to say their names, even though I will not tell you their names because they have their own lives and their own right to privacy. But I want to say that there were 5 of them, and that they were the reason I stayed as long as I did, and also the people who, in the end, showed me why I had to go. Because I watched my daughters watching me. I watched them learning what a marriage looked like, learning what a wife's life was, learning the particular way a woman arranged herself around a man who did not see her. And I thought, this is what I am teaching them. Not in words, in years, in the accumulated daily evidence of my own life. There was one night, I was 37, and one of our daughters, she was 12, came and found me in the kitchen after supper when Aaron had already gone to his chair. She stood beside me while I washed the dishes, and after a while she said, "Mama, does Dad ever make you laugh?" And I stood there with my hands in the soapy water, and I thought about the question seriously. 12 years of marriage. Does Dad ever make you laugh? I could not remember a single time. I told her that different people showed love in different ways. She looked at me with the clear eyes of a 12-year-old who has not yet learned to accept an answer that does not answer anything. She said, "But does he love you?" And I said, "He takes care of us." And she looked at me for another moment, and then she went to bed. And I stood at that sink for a long time afterward because I realized that she had asked me the question I had stopped asking myself years before. And I had given her the same answer I had been giving myself, which was not an answer. It was a direction away from the answer. I stayed for 9 more years after that night. I want to tell you why, because I think it is important, and because I think a lot of people watching this already know why, already feel the truth of it before I say it. I stayed because leaving required a language I did not have yet. I could not point to the thing that was wrong. I could not name the harm in a way that the community would recognize as harm. He had not hit me. He had not left. He had not broken any rule the Ordnung acknowledged. What I was suffering from had no entry in the list of valid grievances. Loneliness inside a marriage was not a reason to end one. Hunger for something the community did not recognize as food was not a recognized form of hunger. And so I turned it inward, the way women learn to do with things that have no permitted outlet. I told myself I was asking for too much. I told myself that contentment was a discipline and that I was failing at it. I told myself that the problem was in my wanting and not in the absence of what I wanted. I was very good at telling myself these things. I had had a great deal of practice. The thing that finally moved me was small. It is always something small, I think. After everything large has failed to move you, it is always something small. Aaron was ill one spring, a serious fever that kept him in bed for nearly 2 weeks. I cared for him the way I had cared for our children when they were sick. I brought food, I brought water, I sat with him in the evenings. One afternoon I was sitting in the chair beside the bed while he slept, and I was watching his face, relaxed in sleep the way it never was awake, and I thought, I do not know this person. 21 years, 5 children, this farm, this bed, these walls, and I do not know this person, and he does not know me, and neither of us has ever tried to fix that, and only one of us has noticed. That was the thought, that simple, that quiet, that devastating. Only one of us has noticed. I left the following year. The leaving was its own story with its own cost, and I will tell that story another time because it deserves more than the end of this one. But I will tell you what I did not expect. I did not expect to grieve him. I had spent so many years feeling the absence of him while he was present that I had assumed his actual absence would feel the same. It did not. I grieved him. Not the man I had wished for. I grieved the man he actually was, steady and silent and present in his way, the only constant in 21 years of my life, the familiar shape of a person I had arranged myself around until his shape was part of mine. Grief is strange that way. It does not only come for the things you lost, sometimes it comes for the things you never had and now also never will. I am in my 60s now. I live quietly. I have rebuilt slowly in the particular way you rebuild when you are rebuilding yourself and a life at the same time. I have learned what I actually need. I have learned what it feels like when someone asks how I feel and waits for the real answer. I have learned that the wanting was not the problem. The wanting was the truest thing in the room. If you are somewhere right now in a life that is not hurting you in ways you can name, but is not feeding you in ways you need, I see you. If you have been telling yourself that wanting more is a failure of gratitude, I see you. If you have been turning your hunger inward because the world around you does not recognize it as hunger, I see you. You are not asking for too much. You are asking for the basic human thing, to be known, to be asked, to have someone in the room who notices when you are sitting at the table crying and who does not walk back outside. Before you leave, I want to thank you for staying with me all the way to here. I know there were 100 other things you could have done with this time, and you chose to spend it listening to a woman tell the truth she could not tell for 21 years. That means something real to me, but I want to be honest with you. More than 90% of the people who watch these stories have not yet subscribed. And if something in this reached you, if it named something you have been carrying without a name, I hope you will subscribe and turn on the notification bell so the next story finds you when it is ready. It is free, and it is how these truths keep traveling to the people who need them. And before you go, please tell me in the comments what part of this stayed with you the longest. Tell me your story if you are ready, or tell me simply that you were here and that you heard it. I will read every word. Until next time, remember this. A life without cruelty is not the same thing as a life with love, and you always had the right to know the difference.